Well, welcome to the Cut for Time podcast here at the Canton United Methodist Church. I'm Pastor Clay, and I'm joined by a very special guest, friend of the podcast, Pastor Peggy Hanson from the Madison United Methodist Church. As I mentioned during the episode last week, we are planning this sermon series with Pastor Peggy, and so we wanted to hop on together to talk about grace. And so, Peggy, hi, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Clay. I think last time I got to join you, I was in a different church.
That's what I was just going to ask. Have you been on the podcast since you moved? And how did the move go? And tell the people where you are now.
I don't think so. I think the last time I was on, I was in Leeds, South Dakota still, and move happened. That's for sure in June. Made it here. So now I'm in Madison, South Dakota, and still figuring out all of the things. It's this bittersweetness where folks here have gotten comfortable with me. So they forget I've only been here 6 months. So right. Like getting through Advent and Christmas, I'm like, what do we do? And now trying to get through Lent, or like as we're preparing for Lent, it's like, what are the traditions I need to be aware of? And they're like, oh yeah, you don't know that. It's like, So they're learning about who I am, and I get to learn about them, and it's fun. And I have to tell you, this sermon series is honestly a great way to get to know people and learn what they do or don't know, or some of the things that they haven't really thought of before.
Sure.
So thank you. Thank you for having this crazy idea to do this. And it's been fun. I've very much enjoyed this sermon series.
Good. I'm so glad to hear that. For those that didn't hear this, I think Eric and I talked about a little bit about this last week. But the sermon series that we're doing right now on demystifying Christian jargon happened because I kind of had half of an idea, and I went to a couple of friends of mine in ministry, co-conspirators for the gospel, if you will. And I said, hey, is this a thing or is this not? And then the conversation just kind of blossomed from there to where we now have the sermon series that we're preaching through. So we started with theology last week. Peggy, do you have any thoughts on the theology sermon?
It was really, really good. So the sermon illustration I used was from an interaction that I had with some colleagues. And the comment was, how long do we preach? And what that's like. And someone's like, well, I preach a good 45-minute sermon. It's like, and you'll understand this analogy better than even I would. It's like preparing a fine steak where you have to get it seasoned just right and let it marinate in that. And then you got to put it on the grill for just the right amount of time on each side to not only get those grill marks, but get that perfection of cooked medium rare in the steak. And then you got to let it rest. And then as you cut into it, and you got to make sure you have the fixings to go with it, but it's a full fine dining experience. And I'm like, 45 minutes for a sermon? I'm like 12. So what does that make me? The chicken nuggets of sermons? And someone's like, well, if you're chicken nuggets, I'm walking tacos. And so we just kind of rolled with it. But after the actual sermon, people walked up and said, you gave us steak. And I was like, oh, okay. And let's be realistic. If you've ever worked in a restaurant, if you can't cook a medium rare steak in 12 minutes, you're doing it wrong. That's
fair.
Granted, that's also not the consumption and the prep work.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
But I think that's what this is for. This is we serve it up during the sermon. Our job is to do that prep work. This is where we get to talk about it in your podcast.
Yeah.
But our sermons should be that grilling and getting plated for folks to ingest. I shouldn't do all the work for them.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So
people have to do some heavy lifting of their own. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right, so I really enjoyed it to get to talk about theology, that we're all theologians because we're all studying about the characteristic of God to understand who God is. And there are times in which we plateau in knowing who God is.
Yeah.
And that's when those crises of faith really happen. And I think that's also for those who were raised in the church, walk away from the church. I also recognize there's trauma that also occurs that leads people to walk away, and that's valid. And so but when you plateau and you don't have, when those waves appear in the storm, you don't have that anchor. as someone and you and I have talked about this, we've encountered some decent storms in our lifetimes.
Oh yeah, for sure.
And having that anchor so it didn't feel like we were just washed out to sea with nothing was huge. And
Yeah, for sure.
and I know that there are those who can do it without, but that are not people of faith, that don't have that anchor, that they'll find other ways. But I mean, that's my anchor, and I don't think I would have done it without it.
Mm-hmm.
So how
Yeah,
did theology
I
go
fully
for
agree.
you?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a really good sermon. I kind of had a hard time like wrapping my brain all the way around it. Just kind of in a preaching context. I opened up by talking about the fact that I did not come like naturally into theology. That I spent a year in college studying music education first, and then just getting to USF and getting to the theology department, and then going to an all department meeting 2 weeks into it to take a 100 question multiple choice test.
Ooh,
Rough,
yeah,
and just, that's kind of how theology can feel sometimes.
totally.
Like just nailing down who God is to us is a bigger conversation than sometimes we give it credit for.
Yes.
Yeah. Because like we can talk about cliches and we can talk about, platitudes for who God is, but then it gets into our actual lived experience of, wait, who was God in this moment? And how was that different from who God was over here in this other moment of our lives? And
Right.
how cool is it that that's still the same God? That God is big enough for multiple definitions, and that God is big enough for when we're just not at our best and can't see who God is. God's going to still be God, even when we don't recognize that.
Right. And that's where I pulled in the theologian Immanuel Kant, who, like, in seminary, him and I were not besties. But
Fair.
since then, at least on this subject, I've really, really held on to something, is that Kant described the knowable and the unknowable, or the noumena and the phenomena.
Yeah.
And how there are moments in which we think, if we were to combine all of the human existence of how we encounter God and know God, it still would not fully capture all of God, because God cannot be contained.
Yep.
And I think that's part of our challenge with theology, is because we want a God we can contain and control, because that would be easier.
That would be way easier. Yeah, totally.
But that's not who our God is. So when we see as God evolves from the Old Testament scriptures, and how people encountered and understood God also evolves and changes, I think also plays a role in how we know God. Because how do we know God is loving and God is good all the time, while God allowed or caused or called for genocide? And to wrestle with that a little bit more can really be uncomfortable, but also, I think, really challenge us.
Yeah.
As followers and believers.
Definitely.
My first day at seminary, I didn't have the 100 questions, but I was like, I'm a fish out of water, because I had a bunch of people that took like religious and philosophy classes, and there was their undergrad. Mine was liberal studies.
Okay.
So here I am at Iliff, and so I'm sitting there with Google and my book, like my handbook, my theological handbook, side by side, going. And then I realized suddenly, no, they don't all know what they're talking about. We're all learning this together.
Yes.
This is what seminary is.
Yep. Same team. But like, speaking from the other side of that experience, like I have a degree in theology, philosophy. That's my undergraduate.
Right.
But even then, when I got to seminary, I was like, y'all are way smarter than I am. And I'm not worthy of being here, and I don't belong here. Like I'm just me with all of my warts and nerdiness and whatever else about me. And I mean, it took me a little while to find that sense of community in seminary as well. Yes. I eventually found it in, some very dear friends that are dear friends to this very day. But it was a very kind of almost othering experience until you got to it.
Right. Yeah. Especially if you saw things differently. So one of the things that I appreciate you and letting me be me is that you understand my brain will see things in a different way, with crazy analogies and different pop culture references and all that. And so when I have these folks who are so steeped in the academics,
Right.
that had this background of religion and philosophy. And here I come, California girl with liberal studies degree, now living in Colorado. There was at one point in time, they looked at me like, what are you doing here? And then all of a sudden I was like, but what if we did this? And what if, like, I hear it this way? And I made up a song so I could remember Abimelech, because we had to do like, I'll sing it to you. Don't worry. You can have this in recording forever. But like we had the like IDs where you had to, who is the person? Like you'd get a word and you had to identify who or what it was, where it's found in the Bible, like, and 3 facts about it, right? So Abimelech, and they're like, how do I remember Abimelech? I'm in the study group. I'm way behind, and they just kept saying Abimelech, and I'm like, Abimelech, 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 Abimelech. In the judges, the mighty judges, Abimelech kills his brothers. And in Judges, he's son of Gideon, and he lives in Shechem. Suddenly, we had all the answer we needed right there in a stupid song that my brain works. They made me sing it for my professor, who is this like crazy smart Dr. Mark George, who just giggled at me, and I thought he like thought I was the most ridiculous person. He put it on our final, and you could tell when everyone got there because they all were like, and I was like, that's right.
That is a Peggy win. Yes.
Right. I made up songs. Yeah. Jeremiah was a prophet, the youngest of them all. Israel should have listened to the words he said, but oh, how they did fall. Right. Like, it became
this is thing. Why we're friends, right? By the way. So, yeah.
Right. But all of a sudden, just who I am intersected with this academia in a wonderful way that, 1, I got community, and 2, gave some levity so we could breathe.
Yeah.
To actually dive deeper. And I think that's our problem with theology, is we get so focused in that we don't take that moment to breathe and see it all as that possibility.
Yeah.
I had that same problem with grace this week. Like I was almost like, oh my gosh, there's so much. Where do you even start?
Yeah, totally.
Like, and it's like, well, let's start when you've received grace. And you would have thought it was like somebody just came in and wiped my entire whiteboard clean of memory. Because I'm like,
oh no,
I don't know. Like, I know it happens. I know it probably happened recently even, but my brain's not coming up with that. It was like pouring water on like an electric keyboard. It's like, nah. Yeah. How did you go with grace? Where did you start with it?
Yeah, so I started with an experience of grace in my life. I started by telling the story of one of my college professors named Dr. Jenny Bangson, and how she extended grace to me when she absolutely did not have to. She had assigned us a paper at the start of class and then said nothing about the paper until the due date of the paper. And she said, the paper is due at the end of class. And I was like, what paper? And all of my classmates had their papers except for me. Oh. And she, like, as the students are turning their paper in, I go up to her and I was like, I just don't have this paper at all. And she said, come to my office after class.
Oh,
that hurt. I'm like, that just hurt, you know?
Did you go throw up first? Because I think I would have, I
was on the verge, man. Yeah. Straight up on the verge. But what happened is she said, I will give you to the end of the week as long as you realize that this is what grace is.
Ooh. I got the goosies just now.
Right?
I just got the goosies. That's powerful. And especially with the position of power.
Yeah.
That professor had to be able to acknowledge the humanity and give that space of redemption. Oh,
yep.
That's awesome.
It's just such an important part of our faith. It's so a part of our understanding of who God is. It connects so deeply to our theology, but then also to how we practice ministry as well. Where has grace played a role in ministry for you?
It comes in those unexpected ways where you don't even realize that it is grace. When which I'm sure, like, if we go really deep into the United Methodist traditions of how we understand grace, we can nerd out, but we'll get there. I'm sure we're going to get there because I didn't get there on Sunday. So hopefully.
Oh, I did. So.
Oh, awesome. I think about, I remember in one of my settings, I met this amazing family that I was privileged to know. And the mom just was frazzled and looked at me and goes, I am so sorry we're not there on Sunday mornings. We work, my husband and I, we work at least 2 jobs, sometimes 3 during the tourist season or the busy seasons that occur. Our kids are all active, so we try and show up for them. So Sunday is the one day that we don't have to get up early to be somewhere right away. And it's not that we don't value church and make it a priority. We also just need that breath. And I said, if that's not Sabbath, I don't know what is. Right. Church should never be an obligation, but should be something we want to do. And it's about community. And sometimes you got to focus on the community that is in your household. And so you show up in other ways. I am not worried. Just know that, we miss you when you're not here. But that's not meant to guilt or shame you, but it's just meant to say we value your presence and that, this is just life at this season. But it was that moment of not condemning, not judging, but seriously seeing someone in the situation they are. And I think that's where we overall as believers in Jesus could do better. Because when we're not getting our way or when things are not meeting our expectation, we feel those big feels that come up, absolutely. But instead of taking into consideration someone else's journey in that exact moment, we understandably are selfish and that we forget to offer that grace, and that grace can be so transformative.
Yeah.
And that's where I think, there's entire social media movements, right, of don't be a Karen. Sorry to anyone watching that's named Karen or listening. I'm sorry.
The Karens in my life are very lovely people. But.
Yes. But recognizing that that's become a terminology. And sometimes there's some validity in their reaction that when we only see part of their story, they're being defamed, so to speak, slandered. But I also think, how often could that have been changed by just a moment of grace?
Right.
And I'm talking like usually the customer service where you see the tantrum versus I am going to bat for a loved one that someone has interpreted as that's being a Karen. Like, I think that's where we've stopped seeing humanity as that imago Dei, right?
Yeah.
The image of God within each other, that we've lost that to be able to offer grace. And that's sad to me.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's because we've also stopped learning how to interact with each other thanks to technology, and we were all isolated for several times.
Yeah, exactly. 2 years of social distancing. Yeah, I mean, it has to have had an effect on people.
Right, but we know there were people who were jerks before.
Fair.
And social media highlights it more frequently. It might have happened as frequently, or people are becoming more bold. I'm not sure which.
Right. Yep.
So. Yeah. Everyone
turns them in. They whip out their phones at the slightest, hint of drama, and then it escalates, and then it gets taken out of context, and yeah.
And instead of pulling out our phones, maybe those are times that we need to interject.
Yeah.
To invite people. Like, I know there are certain times you don't tell people to calm down. That's just going to make it worse.
Yep. Fair.
But there's also moments when you're like, we're going to remove from this situation, or we're going to remove someone else from this situation. And yes, you keep recording to keep safety. I'm not. We don't need 15 videos.
Yep.
But when we have 15 videos and not one person interjecting, I think that's when we also need to recognize the role we play.
Yep. As those that bring grace. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Because on Sunday where I went with, because there was so much for grace. Like, I tried to talk a little bit about baptism and communion, but where the heart of it really went for me, where I felt God was leading, is telling John Newton's story. John Newton is the author of Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
And I did a little research on who this man was. He is not the person you would have expected to write Amazing Grace.
Okay.
But at the same time, he's exactly who you would expect when we understand fully grace, because he had a colorful childhood. At 6 years old, his mom died, and so he was raised by his stepmom because his dad was a shipping merchant, so he was out at sea a lot. They also sent him to boarding school. Both his stepmom, dad, and boarding school did not treat him well. And then as he grew up, he joined the Royal Navy, but had a problem with authority. And so he did not listen to his captain. He would often overstay his leave. So he would desert his ship, like all of these things that would get you in real big trouble in the 1700s. To the point he was put on a slave ship, and he would be punished and have to be like chained up with the slaves. And because he was that disobedient, and get this, he had a mouth that made sailors uncomfortable. Right? Now we sometimes will make the joke that we have colleagues, or sometimes ourselves will have mouth of sailors. So like, to make a sailor uncomfortable.
Yeah, wow. That's saying something.
But here, like, so, okay, because we know Methodist history and we can nerd out about this. There's a storm, because of course there's a storm out at sea. Yep. And where he was standing, he had like taken a few steps forward. Moments later, a wave washes over the deck of the ship, and a crew member gets washed out to sea, who was standing in the same spot John Newton was standing. And then, so he and another crew member like tie themselves onto the deck of the ship so that they won't be washed out to sea.
Sure.
And in a cry of desperation, because he did not believe in God anymore, was like, God have mercy. And they weathered the storm, and he survived, which caused him to start to reevaluate. It wasn't an instantaneous, I believe in God. It began that journey.
Yeah.
And then over the years, he became a priest. And then he also started to help to stop the slave trade. Like he moved in that. And he, as a clergy person, penned Amazing Grace, because if God could bring him from where he was at, of a disobedient, foul-mouthed man of debauchery, into the priesthood and calling for salvation and grace and hope and love, like, where is grace except in that? And so as he writes this epic poem, that then he's also around the late 1700s, as the Methodist move into the colonies, after John Wesley also had a very scary experience on a boat that caused him a crisis of faith. That then led him to understand how by grace he has been saved, not for his own, but for the good news of Jesus Christ, as God's accomplishment and handiwork, that he's called to do something. So though they paralleled and then intersect and really took hold here. So that's why Amazing Grace is such a traditional and powerhouse of a hymn in the Methodist tradition. And I know it is in other traditions as well. Oh
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But now it always seemed to stand out to me. I never understood why until doing the research for the sermon.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But that would get us into, I'm sure, what you talked about in yours, that whole prevenient, justifying, and sanctifying grace, because I mean, it's all right there.
It is. Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely.
So how did you get there? Because I couldn't get there on Sunday.
No, totally hear you. Yeah. So what I ended up talking about was just a real strong definition of what sin is. By talking about, because Paul in the book of Ephesians is going so much from the dark to the light in that scripture of you were dead in your sins and you were pursuing your sins, and that led you nowhere. And you, by grace, you're saved through faith. You die to those, you end up dying to those old ways of life, and then you become transformed into, one of the commentaries I read that I didn't get into the sermon said royalty. You're transformed into royalty. God makes you, through Jesus, you rule in heaven with him. You're a prince and a princess, and that's amazing. but then it's for a purpose. Getting back to that, right, where verse 10 jumps in there. But I just talked about how sin is such a reality of our lives. And then using the words in Greek that he uses of hamartia and peripatoma, talking about the hamartia of the missing the mark. And then peripatoma literally means to slip and fall. And so we will, as people that have sin in our lives, that's going to happen. And despite our best efforts, we're going to sin. We're going to fall short of the glory of God, again, from Paul writing to the church in Rome. But then I said, all is not lost because of our sin, because eventually we awaken to the reality of grace. Eventually we awake to the point that God's been with us in the midst of all of it. And that piece of prevenient grace. And then talking about how in a Wesleyan context, that's what we call it, prevenient grace before we need it. And then walking, as that grace continues to work on us and continues to refine us and make us into God's creation that Paul calls us, we come to that saving faith, that saving grace, that justifying grace. For by grace you are saved through faith. When you put your faith in Jesus Christ, you are justified before God. And then eventually, as you continue to live, it's all a process. It's all a process. You continue to live. You let Jesus have more and more control of your life. That's where it gets into the sanctifying grace, where we are made more and more like Christ, where we take on that part of being God's handiwork for the work that God has for us to do. So that was kind of how I walked through the order of grace, to borrow from our ordination paperwork.
Nice. So I'm going to steal this. I'm going to put this out to the world of the podcast that follows it, or the people that follow this podcast. I'm stealing this when we talk about in 2 weeks salvation.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
For grace to get into salvation.
Yep.
Because they go hand in hand in the way that Methodists understand salvation.
Yep.
That it's not, we can't do anything, but at the same time, we're called to do stuff.
Right.
Because they're not means of salvation, they're means of grace.
Yes.
Because we've experienced it, because we have been saved.
Yep.
We have to let others know that they are not lost and forgotten and loved. Mm-hmm. And so it's not our job to do the saving, but it's our job to extend the grace so that people can enter into that relationship with Christ.
Absolutely.
Which, as we get into it, that's going to lead us into next week, this coming Sunday, mm-hmm. because it's evangelicalism as we reclaim it, because evangelicalism is telling people and showing them. And so again, if we extend grace because of who we know God to be, and sometimes that means we change or we show them a different way God could be for them.
Yeah.
Because if they've only heard God as spiteful and they hear God as loving,
mm-hmm.
Because how many people are like, well, if I walk into church, lightning's going to strike me.
Yes,
you don't want me in your church. I'm like, honey, you're exactly who I want in my church, because it's not my church. Like mm-hmm. I have the privilege of serving it.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And I think when we offer more grace, people are more inclined
mm-hmm.
to be willing, like, well, okay, if our pastor does that,
right,
then
yeah,
when we meet people where they're at,
mm-hmm.
and it's not necessarily about a hand up, like I'm better than you. It's like, no, dude, I'm in this. In this together.
Exactly.
Like, I think the God's prevenient grace goes before us in the way that the series is laid out.
Yes.
To start with theology, to move into grace, mm-hmm. evangelicalism and salvation, into that what we call theodicy of why bad things happen.
Yep.
Which is like the age-old question, and we're always trying to define.
Yep.
Into what is truly faith.
Mm-hmm.
Like, wow. This is laying it out in a way that I hadn't even seen yet. As we've been working on it.
Yeah. Yep. I always tell the congregation, like, I'm not smart enough to have this happen on purpose. Like, just straight up, like, I am not that creative. I'm not that clever. I'm not that smart.
No.
Like, this is totally, yeah.
I'm open to how God's using me, but it's clearly God leading the way on some of this stuff, because I'm like, there are moments when even I'm like, ooh, 100%. That was good. That wasn't me. That was
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. There are those moments that I'm like, hey, I thought of that. And then that's usually when I get a piece of humble pie that I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, yeah,
Yep.
not about me.
Not about you,
Not
not
about me.
about me, not about us. Yeah. Yep.
No, I think when we talk about grace and remembering that God goes before us, there are those moments that we can physically or tangibly or very realistically feel God's grace is so powerful. When I felt my calling into ministry, I was told I should be a deacon because
Okay.
of my passion with working with youth. I should really hone in on that. And I was like,
Mm.
yeah, but no. And they're like, well, why not? I said, because I'm called to the table.
Mm.
I the table is such a beautiful thing. And um that's my calling. And
Yeah.
and to be able to offer grace, and they're like, well, in true pastor form, well, tell me more about that, Peggy. And here I am, like 19, 20-year-old Peggy. Well, it's like, it's like mom's family dinner. Like every Sunday night was dinner at the Stemson household. Stemson's my maiden name.
Yep.
And it didn't matter. Like, mom just said, are you bringing a friend? It didn't matter which friend, whatever. Like, she always made enough of something that whoever showed up was not only going to get fed, but going to leave full.
Mm.
If you left that table hungry, it was your own choice. And this like we had a leaf in the table, like it held
Nice.
like 12 people easily, I think. I don't remember. Maybe
Sure.
that's just, smaller Peggy thinking about this.
Right.
Like
No, that's fair.
younger, I should say. And once you had dinner with us, regardless of circumstances, you were family.
Mm.
You were always welcome back. There were very few people and very few times that folks were not welcome back at the table. And mom, like all of my friends who came to dinner, you were her kids.
Mm.
And that is what I always viewed what it meant to be an elder in the United Methodist Church. Is this table, it's not prepared by me, it's prepared by Christ through his grace. I just have the privilege of setting the table and sharing in it. I'm not better than, I'm probably sometimes less than, if I'm honest. And that this is what it's here for. And I think about those moments of why I was called to step into it, and the gift. I genuinely think I have the gift of hospitality, and what that looks like. And I think that's where grace comes in and intersects and just becomes part of my life. I try anyways. I always say I'm grace filled, not graceful.
There you
what
go.
that looks like. And I think that's why I struggled so much with trying to come up with a sermon, because how do I teach something that's just so ingrained in me in a different way that's not always explainable? But that's the whole purpose of the series, right? Like that's
yeah,
why
definitely.
we're doing this.
Yep. Demystify.
I think I still added a sense of mystery in it, because there's always the gray.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when it comes to grace. Yeah.
I almost feel like during the sermon series, I'm also getting to nerd out for confirmation.
Nice.
Secretly teaching the whole congregation confirmation stuff, and
yeah,
making them remember, hey, did you learn about this in middle school? I bet it wasn't as fun as when Clay and I teach confirmation.
I mean, clearly. So Peggy, I want to thank you for being a part of this sermon series with me, for being, like I said earlier, a co-conspirator in the gospel. I really am looking forward to digging into evangelicalism next week, and then through the rest of this sermon series. What is fun and exciting happening at Madison right now?
We get to host Winter Connection.
Ooh.
That's coming up this weekend, so that's exciting, and just all the preparation that happens. For those who don't know, that are outside of Clay's in my bubble, we Winter Connection is a conference youth event that hosts in 3 different sites. One in the Southeast District, so we get to host that for Madison, and there's one in Bismarck, and then one in Rapid City, and it's for youth 6 through 12. So that's just really excited. We get to do a food pack. We also have like a chili cook-off happening on Sunday. It's going to be a full weekend. Yeah, what's happening in Canton?
Yeah, we are looking hopefully forward to a Lenten Bible study, meeting Jesus around the table. So we are going to be starting during the season of Lent, 2 different sessions of this Bible study about the meals of Jesus and meeting Jesus in the meals. And so we're going to be doing that. One of them is going to be happening at Pizza Ranch for the first session, and then the conversation around food is going to happen. Like, are we going to do just kind of a potluck or break it into who wants to help furnish a meal? And then the other one's going to happen here at the coffee shop here in town at Laura's Lattes. So we're looking forward to that quite a bit. We're also in the middle of February, we're going to do something called Christians Got Talent, which is going to be kind of an old school Singspiration with hopefully a new twist. But we just figure that winter is cold and boring. And so let's go to the church and have some fun and sing some songs and just let our talented musicians from across the entire community come together and sing our hearts out. So
that sounds like fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be a really, really cool event. So we're looking forward to both of those things. Well, thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Cut for Time podcast. Be sure to join us here in worship at the Canton United Methodist Church at 10 o'clock on Sunday, either in person or on Facebook Live. Eric and I will be back next week with another episode of the Cut for Time podcast. Thanks for listening to our Cut for Time conversation. Join us for worship in person or on Facebook Live Sundays at 10 o'clock Central Time. And now go in peace and serve the Lord.